Prime Minister, nice to see you, sir.
Thank you. It's good to be with you again, Greta.
And welcome back to the United States.
Thank you.
We had fun talking. I enjoyed talking to you last fall when you were here.
Indeed.
Last night I listened very carefully to your speech, very carefully, and in fact I have a transcript of it in front of me, and it says that the international community has tried diplomacy, that hasn't worked, that the community has applied sanctions, that hasn't worked either, that there are efforts to impose tougher sanctions, but Iran's nuclear program continues in spite of that. You said Iran's goal is to develop nuclear weapons, and as Prime Minister, you will never gamble with the security of Israel. It sounds like war is inevitable.
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, we've seen, in fact, that Iran backed off from its nuclear program, its nuclear weapons program. Really only once in the 15, 16 years that I've been warning the world about the dangers of a nuclear-armed Iran. And the only time they backed away was in 2003 when they thought there'd be a credible military threat against them. So in fact, the paradox is that if they actually believe that they're going to face the military option, you probably won't need the military option.
And I guess that's why I suppose that Secretary of Defense Panetta's statements that military options are on the table, and President Obama's statement as well, is helpful to discourage Iran.
I think these are important statements. I think that the idea that containment vis-a-vis a nuclear Iran is not an option are important statements. Just remember what it means. You try to contain a regime that is fostering terror worldwide, that could use nuclear terror here in any city, any port. That's a very dubious proposition. So I think all these things are important, as was the President's statement of something that is very true about the ethos of what Israel is all about, that Israel as a sovereign country must have the ability to defend itself by itself against any threat. And as a sovereign country, we have the right to decide to act in our own defense.
Is there anyone that disputes that, though, that Israel doesn't have a right to defend itself, doesn't have a right to its sovereignty? I mean, obviously the sovereignty, but the right to defend yourself.
Well, you know, it's a question of the assessment of when you have to activate that right. I think that's the real important thing. I think the reiteration of that basic proposition was important. I think you can't repeat that too often.
And I guess that means a little bit in terms of preemptive, whether you preempt Iran taking nuclear action, building a bomb, is whether you go in there ahead of time. Is that what you mean?
Well, I mean that the Jewish people were faced often in our history with the situation that people tried to destroy us. In fact, they did destroy millions of Jews in the last century, and we could do nothing about it because we had no sovereign state. Now they still try. They still threaten to destroy us, but this time there's a state of Israel, and if necessary, we'll act in our own defense. And I think it's very important to repeat that clearly. And obviously, this is something that is perhaps the supreme responsibility that I, as the Prime Minister of Israel, have to guarantee that the future of the Jewish state and the Jewish future is secure.
You talk about the Jewish future, but you also touched on last night that if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, obviously you're in the direct line of fire, and Ahmadinejad has made very derogatory remarks or stated his very ugly intentions towards Israel. But it's a world problem.
Now you're being a diplomat. They said that Israel should be wiped off the face of the earth.
Indeed.
And they're developing nuclear weapons to boot for that purpose. Not only for that, they could also shut down the Straits of Hormuz. Now they're threatening it. You're worried about the price of oil today? You think about what it would mean if Iran, this regime, radical regime that chants death to America, death to Israel, they'd get their hands on nuclear bombs, atomic bombs. A, they could use it against any one of us. B, they can give it to their terrorist proxies to use against any one of us. 3, they could threaten credibly to block the Straits of Hormuz, which would send the price of oil skyrocketing, not anything that even remotely resembles what we have now. And they'll pocket the dough because they're oil producers. So, you know, these are things that could change the world. It could be like a hinge of history. We could live in another time. We've never had, since the advent of nuclear weapons, a regime that could act with such irresponsibility, having those weapons of mass death. So I think this is something that we should talk about. Everybody talks about the cost of taking action to stop Iran. I think it's important to start talking about the cost of not acting to stop Iran, of a world in which the Ayatollahs would have atomic bombs, I think that could be catastrophic.